This is the Comics Alternative Euro Comics. Reviews of Little Tulip, Billy Budd KGB, The Magician's Wife, and The Boys of Sheriff Street. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Euro Comics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Edward. And together we're 1.5 guys with PhDs who love talking about comics.
That's right. We got to come up with another way of saying that because it sounds like one of us is a little person.
Yeah. Or we could say a PhD and an ABD if you'd like or something.
We're two guys with advanced degrees talking about European comics.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so that's who we are. And on the February Euro Comics episode, we're going to look at several works written by Jerome Charyn, including Little Tulip, Billy Budd KGB, and The Magician's Wife. All of these are illustrated by François Boucq. And then we're also going to look at The Boys of Sheriff Street with art by Jacques de Loustal.
Oh. You may remember François Boucq from our earlier episode discussing westerns with Alejandro Jodorowsky's Bouncer.
That's right. So it hadn't been that long ago that we talked about the work of François Boucq, and now we're going to look at his work within the context of Jerome Charyn. But before we get into that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Euro Comics is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price. Sometimes 50% off cover. But often, you can find discounts that are a little more impressive than that.
Yeah, for instance, in December, Humanoid just put out a book with art by Stanislas. It's called By the Numbers. Stanislas is one of the great ligne claire cartoonists of the current day and age, and it's 30% off at only $17.47. And also Dark Horse has been fighting the good fight and bringing back a lot of Manara in expertly reviewed, revised, and retranslated editions by their former editor Diana Schutz, who's been reworking the Italian, and they put out they're up to volume 6 of the Manara Library, and that's 40% off for a really nice hardcover of one of the major Italian artists of softcore erotica.
Yeah. So, you got a lot of great discounts, European comics and otherwise, at Discount Comic Book Service. Check out their website, which is dcbservice.com. You got to go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Edward and Derek sent you. Well, Edward, how have things been going? How has the translation work been evolving?
It's really wall to wall. Like I am at my desk 8 to 10 hours a day this month, and which is great. It's great news. But it's interesting. I've actually been doing a series of in addition to the digital comics, which I think are coming in fast and furious, I've been doing a series of nonfiction comics for NBM. Sorry, not NBM, for IDW, and they're all from the same imprint in France. They're called the Little Comics Library of Knowledge, and the 4 that I have one is on New Wave Hollywood. One is on sharks, one is on the cultural history of tattooing, and the other one is on heavy metal. It's a little drier work, but I find I have to do a lot more research. For instance, in the New Hollywood one, a lot of it's not so much translation anymore as just triangulation almost. Figuring out I do a lot of back translation from, like, he quotes Americans but translate it into French, so then I have to like try to guess which words the Americans used so I can find the quote and where it came from, because he doesn't cite sources ever. It's very or the titles of the movies will be different in French, so then I have to figure out which American movie it was. Or whereas in that's not true at all for the heavy metal one. Heavy metal, the song titles, albums are all the same.
Yeah. So you say that IDW is going to be putting this stuff out.
Yeah, I don't know when. It is interesting. I've also got like sprinkled other things for little publishers, like another one for Titan, another and a sort of a young reader's superhero book for Top Shelf. But Top Shelf still hasn't brought out Peters' Lupus yet, and I did that for them like a year and a half ago. So
I was asking about those IDW titles because that series that you're doing the translations for right now, as far as I know, has not been announced, or at least I've seen nothing about it in the press. So I guess this is something that months down the road we can see solicits for, and then we can say, hey, our colleague Edward translated those books.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep you updated on what their plans are for them. I don't think they're necessarily. I think actually the artists featured in this series are terrific across the board. Like, they've got Bruno doing the new Hollywood one, and I've always loved Bruno. You and I have talked about him on our show, but they've got Hervé Borges. They've got really good artists, but I don't know that the books themselves would. I mean, unless we do, like, I don't know, a nonfiction episode, that would also be interesting. But I think the books themselves are pretty, well, I don't know. No, actually, I take that back. It might be interesting to see, what are the narrative strategies used in nonfiction comics, especially nonfiction comics that are not memoir-based, that are so information-heavy, that are really essays. Because I think some of these books are more successful than others in pictorially integrating the information. Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking about, is the closest thing to that is that line of books that First Second does on science, the illustrated science books. So that's, have you read any of those?
No, sadly, I'm not familiar with those. I mean, once in a while, I feel like a lot of the nonfiction comics I've seen, I don't even know where they're from. They're not like from regular comics publishers, but they're like, very like there's a biography seems to be a popular one. I don't mean the ones that Self-Made does, but I mean like really kind of ugly. I remember there's a really ugly Trotsky biography, but sadly I'm not familiar with those. I think these IDWs will definitely be pitched at older readers just by nature of the topics, and so some of the topics are kind of graphic. Though the Sharks one is pretty all ages and probably my favorite so far.
Okay, well, look forward to those. But for this month, we're going to be talking about something quite different. We're going to be looking at works of fictional narrative, and all of them are written by Jerome Charyn. And we don't necessarily need to discuss these in any kind of order, but the most recent publication that we're going to be discussing came out back in December of last year, and that's Little Tulip, written by Jerome Charyn with art by François Boucq. And this one was published by Dover. And in fact, every single one of the titles that we're discussing this month came out from Dover. Now, other works that we're going to be discussing this month will include Billy Budd KGB, which came out in September. And again, that's a Charyn Boucq project. And then there's The Magician's Wife, again by Charyn and Boucq. That came out in September of 2015. And then, I don't know if we want to call it the odd man out or the work that kind of stands apart in different ways from the others. And that's The Boys of Sheriff Street. This was written by Jerome Charyn with art by Jacques de Loustal. This came out in July of 2016. And again, all of these are Dover publications. And by the way, we should start off by thanking Dover for being so kind as to send us review copies of all of these books. And we appreciate that. It makes these shows possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And These books all cluster from a similar period in their original French publication to from 86 to I think 94 at the latest, or maybe even earlier than that. But like they're all clustered around that time. I think the main difference is that these were, especially The Magician's Wife was Boucq's a real breakout book, the one where he really moved from being a comics artist who worked primarily for comics magazines to a full-fledged graphic novelist. Whereas by the time Charyn worked with Loustal was pretty established as an artist already, and Charyn sought him out deliberately from having seen another work he'd done a story of a jazz musician.
Right. Now, I think if I'm not mistaken, the French publication of Little Tulip actually came out in 2014.
Is it that late? It's a new one?
Yeah,
huh.
yeah. In fact, that's what I see on the copyright page. And then Billy Budd KGB was published in French originally in 1994. Magician's Wife was collected, I guess, in French in 1987. And then The Boys of Sheriff Street was originally published in French in 1991. So yeah,
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at a variety of publications that when they first came out go back to the mid 1980s. And then the most recent one is Little Tulip, which was published in France in 2014. But you know that one of the things that, Little Tulip and Billy Budd KGB have in common is, speaking of time, in some ways, I guess they're period pieces in that both are clearly anchored in 1970s America. I mean, the look of the city, the look of the people, their dress, the signs, just the cultural signifiers that we see in Boucq's art in both Little Tulip and Billy Budd KGB scream out 1970s.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do feel like that's definitely true of Little Tulip, and Billy Budd looks like that, and yet I feel like it should be even a decade earlier just because of when it begins. So I don't, yeah, but yeah, that was something that I went around in my head a bunch. Cause I do, especially since I was doing the New Wave Hollywood book, I was just very aware of the influences of that era's American cinema on French visual artists. Mm-hmm. And so like I do feel like that was a very influential cinematic period, both in its, auteur films as well as its, more genre or B productions. And it's an era that lives on in people's fascination. And so
yeah, I couldn't help but think of films like The French Connection and The Conversation, things of that sort. These classic 1970s, especially crime films.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree that the look of both those, especially Billy Budd, is just very, very indebted to it. And yet, since it begins right after the war and I think by the time he goes to America, it should be the late 50s, really, only just based on his age. But anyway.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Now, maybe we should give a little context about what these books are about, because we've been throwing the titles around, giving a little bit of the setting, context. But let's give a little more detail. So, Little Tulip is a story. The protagonist is someone named Paul, whose original name was Pavel. And he is a very adept tattoo artist. And he lives in what I assume is 1970s New York. And he has a tattoo parlor. He has a young girl who is a friend of his named Azami, who wants to be a tattoo artist as well. Another thing that Paul or Pavel is known for is his uncanny ability to draw what people describe. In other words, to put into art what someone else is trying to get across either literally or even I guess on a more emotional, even spiritual level, if you will, because Paul is a tattoo artist, but he's also someone that the police come to constantly whenever they need someone to do need a crime artist. And in the major crime that's taking place in the book Little Tulip is perpetrated by someone who's going by the name of Bad Santa. And this is someone who is a serial killer who's going around and killing women. And the police do not have a leg up on who this person is. In fact, as the story progresses, people get the sense, especially Paul gets the sense that there's more than one person involved in the Bad Santa killings, that this may be a group of men. And interestingly enough, as the story unfolds, Paul or Pavel's past life becomes very much a part of his current life in tracking down the killer or killers with Bad Santa.
Yeah, and his past life takes us back, readers, to the gulags, and not only that, the culture, Russian prisoner culture, Zeks, I guess, right?
Right.
And their elaborate tattoos, and this boy's or this man, how this man's coming of age, in the Gulag system.
Right. So at least a good half of this book is backstory, maybe well over half is backstory, because scattered throughout the contemporary storyline are flashbacks or recountings or remembrances of how Pavel, I guess, eventually became Paul the tattoo artist, now living in the United States. And so Paul or Pavel's parents, or at least his father, was from the United States, who emigrated to the Soviet Union, I think right before Germany invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. And then after the war, he and his parents remained in the Soviet Union. But then with the advent of the Cold War, they were seen as spies and American agents, unjustifiably so. And then they were taken to the gulags along with Paul or Pavel. I keep going back and forth, Paul or Pavel, the same person. He was taken to the gulag, and that's where he learned his trade, so to speak, as a tattoo artist.
Yeah. Yeah, the funny thing is, this is I read this early on out of the four, and I'm sorry, I just can't get over the fact that I completely whiffed on when it was published, because I was like, wow, he was writing about Russian prison tattoos way back then. No, just because they're I feel like they're something that's more recently surfaced onto the subcultural scene as a fashionable thing. But now it's like, oh no, actually it was much later. So, I'm not trying to rob him of any credit. It's still I don't know enough to know how well researched it is, but it does come across as very credible and compelling. And he sets up a lot of, I would say, well, I don't know. I think this and Billy Budd, these two are more kindred spirits as books in terms of their protagonists and their journeys and their mentor figures and the settings. But an interesting thing is, and I mean, and they're definitely very propulsive stories, right? They're, he's not afraid. I feel like the main impression I get out of Charyn is that he's a very fearless author. His stories have a lot of appetite and gusto. They have a lot of energy. They're not afraid to move forward and put people through the ringer, and just things happen very things are. I find it, compared to today's storytelling, I find it fairly narratively compressed. More so in some books than others, but things happen quickly.
Right, you're right. I mean, this is definitely both of these are very action oriented or plot heavy narratives.
Yeah, and he doesn't even dwell on moments that much, and there really isn't much banter either. I feel like one of the main key characteristics of contemporary decompressed storytelling is just time banter, and that doesn't
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that Little Tulip and Billy Budd KGB share a number of things in common. Well, it's a little context here with Billy Budd KGB. This is also a story that in many ways begins in the Soviet Union. We have as a protagonist a young boy. When we first see him, his name is Yuri, and he's an orphan, and he is taken into a house, I think, in the final days of the Second World War.
They just find him in a field full of crows.
Right. And so we don't even know as readers at any point in the story where he came from before that time. So he does have quite a mysterious origin. But one of the things that distinguishes him, at least at the very beginning, is his cleft lip. And the kids that he is in the Soviet orphanage with, they're really nasty to him, as you would expect kids to be. And they call him Devil Mouth, and they make fun of him, and they taunt him, and they do a lot of really, really bad, nasty things to him. And so that's
Devil Mouth. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, Devil Mouth is actually the French title of the book.
Oh, really? So it's not Billy Budd KGB.
No, Little Tulip is actually Little Tulip in French. Like it's not Petit Tulip, it's actually Little Tulip. They use the English words for the title, but the French title for this book is actually Bouche de Diable, or Devil Mouth. Yeah. Which is funny because he really only has that for the first third of the book, and then
if that,
but and it's funny because when I read it, in the beginning is very I read it as that he gets taken in by a peasant woman, and then he gets tyrannized on by the peasant woman's husband, and then and then he and he escapes, and it is very fairy tale like. And it's funny that the book actually comments on that when he's at the orphanage, and the KGB comes to recruit him. The KGB person, when he's asking about his past, he's like, "Wow, that sounds like something out of a fairy tale." But I think that beginning really sets a certain mood. And there is a continuing strain of mysticism throughout the book, and I would say both of these books, both Little Tulip and Billy Budd. But the mysticism changes. It's very Now, it's very protean mysticism. It's non-denominational. It kind of goes from culture to culture.
Right. And I want to talk about that surreal or mystical turn that we have with both of these stories. And I think that will link it up quite nicely to what we find in The Magician's Wife. But first, let's set a little more context with Billy Budd KGB, because you mentioned that the KGB recruits him when he's in the orphanage, and that they do. There is an agent within the KGB named Colonel Strevogin, and he, I guess for all practical purposes, is the big bad of this narrative. And at first, he seems to be a little less harsh in that he sees potential in Yuri, and he takes him under his wings, and he becomes the primary focus of all of the training. Now, many of the orphans who are taken in by the KGB to be trained ultimately as American agents. And so they're in classes to learn the American ways, American culture, how Americans tick, how to fit in other words, how not to be detected as a Soviet agent. But Yuri has, I think, special abilities in more ways than one. Not only does Strevogin see him as having, I guess, more of a chance of fitting in, but also there's something to Yuri. He has, he's precognizant, and these come to him in dreams. And so we see him a number of times in the early part of the book, as a kid dreaming, and he kind of anticipates what's going to happen in a future date. And sometimes this future date is, just hours or maybe just a couple of days away. But Strevogin apparently discovers Yuri's abilities early on. And so it takes him under his wing, trains him. And he becomes his protege. And before Yuri is sent over as an agent, as an undercover agent in the United States, he's given the name Billy Budd, thus the title Billy Budd KGB. Now, I wanted to ask you, Edward, do you feel much significance to the name Billy Budd in light of, Melville's classic Unfinished Novel?
I was looking for it. I was totally looking for it, but I really don't. I really don't see. Yeah.
And that's
I don't.
One of the reasons why I ask you is in light of what you said a moment ago, in that is the French title for this book was Devilmouth. And that to me would make more sense than the title that it has in English, which is Billy Budd KGB. Because the name Billy Budd is in the title, I would have expected more of a clear link to
some
the
parallel.
Melville Classic, but there really isn't that I can ferret out. I mean, I guess the closest we could come to is Yuri does in many ways come across as an innocent.
Yeah, but it's so vague. It's so vague. Yeah. And the thing is, Little Tulip starts out innocent too. I mean, they both go through the story with very, very clear, classic markers. Like they both have kindly mentors who are a little more intellectual than the brutes they're surrounded with. They both have these sort of really rough sexual experiences thrust upon them. They both grow up in environments where they have to kill or be killed, and yet they are not warped by that terribly, but they're still haunted in dreams.
Right.
Like there's a lot of there's a but I think I guess but I didn't really see the Billy Budd connection there.
Yeah, so that makes me wonder, why focus on that as the title, right? Billy Budd KGB. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I do have to give him, and this is a side note, I guess, but I feel like I do have to give him props for investigating, especially in these two books. I feel like he does a really thorough job of making fairly alien subcultures come alive, and that's not just the Russian world of the Russian underworld and the KGB training here, but also like he there's an effortless diversity. It doesn't feel like maybe it's because he's a city native and he's always been surrounded by diversity, but it doesn't feel like he's shoehorning in characters of different ethnicities, and there are different, like in Little Tulip, Paul has Asian lover, and then in this
mother,
one,
Yoko.
Yeah, and then a Japanese woman, and then in this one, there's a lot of in Billy Budd, there's a lot of stuff with the Native Americans who work on high rises, right? Is it the Algonquins, or was it more than one tribe? I don't even.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. In fact, his main companion, I guess, in Billy Budd, Yuri, or Billy's friend, who actually becomes more of a savior figure as the story progresses, goes by the name of Red Eagle.
Yeah.
And, and in fact, I wanted to ask you about the representations of, I guess, Native Americans or Native American issues in Billy Budd KGB. Did you think that Charyn maybe fell back on certain, I don't know, how do I put this, stereotyped assumptions, cultural assumptions about Native Americans?
Sure. But I also think that, like, I feel like that's a case of, I feel there's a lot of hokey. When Red Eagle takes out, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 KGB people with a bow and arrow, it's like, okay, like, we can. I do feel like that's what I was saying about with the Charyn books. It's like for everything I really love in them, there's something like really hokey for me on the next page that I find like really just kind of dated or hard to swallow or just sometimes just weird. Like, in the KGB school, which is on the shores of the Black Sea as a former monastery, it's like, there are some cool surreal touches, right? Like there are these midgets who run the film projector. I don't know why. They're just me. But then like all the students are wearing like full head face mask gear, like all the time. And is that explained?
That's good. I'm glad you pointed that out, because that image is on the cover of the book. The students who were in the KGB school who were being trained. I just assumed that their masks were a part of the uniforms, and what that does is it kind of whitens out, so to speak, or blanks out their individual identities. But you gotta imagine that has got to be as hot as hell, having that on your head all the time.
Yeah, because it's on all the time. Like, I mean, it's on when he has sex, it's on when he takes a walk, and it's on when they eat. There's even a scene where he's naked, but he's still wearing that
thing.
Yeah, and there's
So,
something,
like,
rather kinky at times.
yeah, totally.
When, the boys, in particular Yuri, are being, how should we put it, trained or serviced, by Russian women as part of their training, and they have to wear the masks. And in fact, when I first saw the cover of Billy Budd KGB, I thought that maybe this was a sci-fi-ish narrative.
Yeah.
Because of the mask. But then when I started reading it, I was quickly dissuaded of that assumption.
Yeah, no, I do think the Native American stuff is pretty hokey, and because it kind of goes into the realm of not only does it sort of not only does the spiritualism of Red Eagle not as, I don't know, deeply developed as, say, the KGB culture or some other subcultures we see in there. No, but also, like, by the end, he's just almost superhuman. Like, I mean, I don't even know, like, does he levitate them out through a manhole? It seems like it. It seems like he levitates them upward, and then, like, and then he's like this he is like a one-man commando squad, and, like, like, I mean, it goes, but then there are other details that, like, even in that fight scene I'm talking about where he takes out all the KGB guys, there's cool details that bring me right back to the scene, like blood pouring. The fight takes place at St. Pat's Cathedral, so there's the blood runs into the gutters and pours out the gargoyle's mouth. That's a cool image.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great ending to Billy Budd KGB. I was looking at both of these books just now as you were talking, and I saw that, Billy Budd is the longest of all of the Charyn books that we're discussing this month.
Sure.
And it's about 120 pages, whereas Little Tulip is just about 80 pages. So, I mean, that's more in line with what I think of as, an average, maybe a little larger than average size French album. Billy Budd's a little thicker. But let me ask you this, Edward. Did you get the feeling that, Little Tulip was longer than Billy Budd? I mean, I have a feeling that, after having read the two, that Little Tulip was, page count wise, a longer narrative, but it's definitely not. And I think because there's much more story going on in Little Tulip, there's not near as much going on in Billy Budd KGB. Now, you were talking earlier about the condensed kind of storytelling in Little Tulip. I don't think that Billy Budd KGB is decompressed by any means, but I do think it is more decompressed than Little Tulip.
I agree. I think Billy Budd is actually probably what I would recommend out of these four as an entry point, because I think Billy Budd is the most accessible and fully fleshed out for what I'm not saying my readerly tastes are any standard for the average American reader of today, but I do feel like Little Tulip, I feel like, rushes a lot of what I think would be moments that could be lingered on. I feel like Little Tulip has kind of got this runaway train momentum, and Billy Budd. On the other hand, there are lots of other things that are, like, less, savory about Billy Budd. I mean, we've been circling around the Indian, the Native American issue, but, like, and I think Billy Budd has some, is more narratively. It's not that it's decompressed across the spectrum, but, like, there are parts that are and parts that aren't. Like, there are some nifty silent sections. Like, there's a section where he has to lose some tails, and it's neat to see that process illustrated. Like, lose some people who are following him, and like, that's clever, and that's like a couple pages long, whereas other times fairly major events are summarized in very brief sections. But then the dream sequences are also, like, kind of more expanded, and I find it's just a really odd book in that it's so, like, gritty and genre and would be hard hitting, and yet one of the major set pieces is the KGB major saying to him, no, we want you, Billy, we want you to use your dream power to invade this other guy's mind, and like we want you to be a telepath. Like in this book that is otherwise seems to be like, very much, I don't know, realist and nailed down in harsh realities of life. One of the set pieces is no, you have to be a telepath.
Right.
We'll drug you to be a telepath, and it's interesting because it's weird that I find that discordant, because one of the things that I read Charyn saying in interviews is how he found such freedom in comics because those two things could go together in comics. There was a pulpiness that comics could support, he felt, as a medium that prose narrative couldn't. The prose narrative for him was even more closely bound to the codes of realism, and so like he went into comics so he could do this kind of thing. And here I am saying it feels weird, like it doesn't fit together.
No, I agree. But this brings us back to an earlier point that you made, and that is the mysticism of these books. And definitely there's quite a bit of that going on in The Magician's Wife, which I want to get to. But I think it is also quite prevalent in both Little Tulip and Billy Budd KGB, to the point that it's almost inappropriate, or at least it caught me off guard, especially, let's say, with Little Tulip. Because Little Tulip is, for all practical purposes, I think, a more natural or realistic narrative, right? So the story we have of Pavel, his past, where he is now helping to solve the Bad Santa serial killings, all of that, I mean, is definitely anchored in realism. Now, I don't want to give anything away, no spoilers about the end of this narrative, but I will say that what happens at the end has everything to do with a more mystical turn that this narrative takes. And that caught me by surprise, because I don't think there was anything about the mystical turn at the very end that anticipated this for me. And that's where I got the feeling of a little bit of discord. It's like, I mean, yeah, I guess Charyn is free to do with the story whatever he wants to, but there was nothing in, let's say, the previous, 5/6 of the book that prepared me for that last sixth, which is really anchored into this kind of strange, surreal, almost mystical, dreamlike way that the story progresses.
Yeah, I also found a little unsettling, and maybe this is a good segue to
Magician's Wife.
Magician's Wife is the relationship between Paul and Azumi's daughter, which is in the end because there's that younger man. I mean, so that vastly older man, younger girl dynamic is basically the central dynamic of Magician's Wife, and it reminded me a little of, like, say, Luc Besson's The Professional, or Leon, the movie, in that, like I wonder how much more culturally comfortable. Sharon's an American writer, but like I wonder how much more culturally comfortable the French are with that kind of.
I see where you're going. In fact, I did
May,
not.
December. It's like a May. Okay. March, December.
Okay. A couple things. First off, let me say that I did not see the parallel between, let's say, the Paul, young girl Azumi, mother Yoko relationship in Little Tulip as somewhat similar to the young Rita, older Edmund, and then Rita's mother relationship in The Magician's Wife. So I think that's quite insightful. I do think, though, they're quite different. Unless I missed something, there was no place whatsoever in Little Tulip that suggested anything between Paul and Azumi. I don't think this was even a masked sexual relationship at all. It just seemed to be one of teacher and mentor, just like we had the teacher-mentor relationship between a young Paul or Pavel and the man who trained him as a tattoo artist back in the Soviet Union in the Gulag, Andrei. See, that's how I saw that relationship. But I think you take that young girl, older man relationship in Little Tulip, that between Paul and Azumi. And when we see something similar in Magician's Wife, the relationship between the older magician Edmund and the younger woman Rita, then it definitely does take a sexual turn in that book.
Well, I don't know. I mean, she does kiss him in Little Tulip, and granted, it's on a hospital bed to try to wake him up. And then I get this feeling that there's this sense that she is his spiritual companion by the end in some way, and so there's some deeper link there. And I do feel like that's something Magician's Wife tries for also, is that like these people are somehow fated to be together because they understand each other despite all the things despite all the ways that their relationship is warped and dysfunctional. They have some deep understanding that. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just didn't see the relationship between Paul and Azumi in Little Tulip in the same way that you did. Although I can see strains of what we had in the earlier book, chronologically speaking, the earlier book, The Magician's Wife, because I think that problematic relationship is definitely there. Now let's talk a bit about The Magician's Wife, because we've mentioned it a few times, but we've never really, jumped into that. As you pointed out earlier, this is basically the book that put both Charyn and Boucq on the map as a creative team, right? I mean, this got them quite a bit of attention. Originally came out in 1986, 1987. I think the collection came out in 1987. And whereas Little Tulip and Billy Budd at times flirt with mysticism, I think, and the surreal, The Magician's Wife is heavily indebted to the surreal.
Yeah, Magician's Wife, it's Charyn's first comic. He had up till then never thought of he'd loved comics but never grown up on American comics but never thought of writing them. And then was living in France, teaching a film there in Paris at the time, and was approached and so like Magician's Wife, I gather, grew out of an aborted a novel of his that he'd given up on that focused around a woman who turned into a werewolf woman,
Mm-hmm.
a female werewolf. And then but I do think, again, I'm sorry about that thing where I whiffed on the dating of
that's okay.
Of Little Tulip, but I do think The Magician's Wife art is noticeably a bit rougher, especially in the sort of long shots. Not so much in the close-ups, because I think Boucq always gets a lot of good mileage out of faces, and also oftentimes I feel like using faces a lot gives you this talking heads kind of feeling. But Boucq has some really expressive faces throughout the three books, and but I do think like some of the there's already a mistier, more expressionistic style going on in Magician's Wife, just narratively, because like different planes of reality merging in a single panel, a single image. But on top of that, I do think that the art is a little rougher compared to, say, Billy Budd. It's a little and maybe I'm just projecting that sense of artistic evolution on it. But
no, definitely, it's a great point. Talking about the differences in style, Boucq style, between, let's say, The Magician's Wife, the earlier work, and the more recent one that we're discussing, which is Little Tulip. The art that we see in Little Tulip looks like it is the exact same kind of art that we saw just a couple of months ago. We were discussing Bouncer, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Magician's Wife, it does have kind of a rougher, more maybe foundational look to it, right? That at this point, Boucq is still trying to work out what will eventually become the style that we, more clearly recognize as his.
Yeah, foundational is a good way of putting it. And also, like, you'll see him phasing out sound effects as well. There's I don't think there's any in Little Tulip, but there are some in Magician's Wife. Yeah, and yeah, Magician's Wife actually is. It reminds you of two very different things. It actually reminded me a little bit of I know it predates it by a long shot, but it reminded me a little bit of Peter's Pachyderm. And then
wow, I haven't read that in a while.
Yeah, just in terms of like the slippage between realities, and because it's the chronology is very loopy, the sense of reality is very tenuous, and also because of that same sense, it reminded me of Manchurian Candidate, the Frankenheimer, the original, like the way that he would sort of in the dream sequences and memory sequences, the way he would he would have a fluid camera movement, but he would have the set would be sort of metamorphic in the background, like by the time the camera looped around again, parts of it would be different and replaced, and it contributed to this sustained dreamlike atmosphere. And I do feel like that's something the book carries off very successfully, is a sustained dreamlike atmosphere across 80 pages.
Right. Yeah. And there is this sense of kind of a dream or surreal world and a more realistically based event taking place. But the boundary between those two, very fluid, and it changes back and forth. And you're right. There's a smooth, back and forth between those.
Yeah. Very
various
porous
worlds. Right. So whereas I think it's fairly simple to put your finger on, let's say, a plot summary of something like Little Tulip or Billy Budd KGB, it's a little more difficult with The Magician's Wife. So if someone asks you, what is The Magician's Wife about? It's like, now when we're at the very beginning of this book, we're introduced to the protagonist, which is a young girl at the time whose name is Rita Wednesday. And even when we're introduced to her in Sarasota Springs, New York, it's in a very dreamlike, even carnivalesque environment. And so from the very beginning, I didn't know whether or not to accept this as something that is anchored in reality or something more dreamlike or not. And we learned that Rita is enamored of an older man named Edmund, who is a magician, and that Edmund has a relationship in various ways with Rita's mother, Mrs. Wednesday. And I don't know if she's ever referred to by her first name. Is she?
I don't remember that, but she's his original
assistant.
Yeah.
And I guess lover at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Rita sees their relationship, both sides, both the professional and the personal, from backstage, literally, and also from aside, but in a way that as a young girl, she is probably jealous of her mother. Now, eventually Rita's mother ages out, to the point that, Edmund's quite cruel, about this and the way that he treats her on stage as his assistant. And it eventually makes as his assistant the younger Rita. But just as with the mother, Rita as an assistant also becomes a lover of Edmund's. They get married, but that relationship is doomed to failure because of the kind of nasty and abusive nature of Edmund, the magician. And so eventually Rita leaves that relationship, and whereas she had a life that was, very flamboyant, was very stage based, almost kind of anything goes, kind of extravagant in a variety of ways. When she escapes that marriage, she goes into a life that is very mundane and is anything but flamboyant and flashy, which she experienced as a magician's assistant.
Right. She becomes a diner waitress in 1970s New York.
Right. And it's during her time as a waitress that we learn something going on that's lycanthropic that you mentioned. And again, and that was a little weird. I mean, what did you make of her becoming a werewolf?
Well, it's an expression. I guess I read it as an expression of her of like inner anger, right? Like that she has a lot bottled up. And I mean, there's a part where it even comes out when they're on stage, right? But I'm just not sure if that's an actual memory or projection on her part. I'm thinking it's a memory, but
yeah. Well, see, this raises the question, though. I mean, does she actually become a werewolf, or is this something that, like, the werewolf becomes a metaphor, right? Now, I would tend to tend to feel that it was the latter, if not for the fact that there are a series of killings in New York. When Rita's a waitress at a little hole in the wall diner, that are quite horrific, that seem to be something committed by an animal, a beast, something like a werewolf or a vicious animal of some sort. And in fact, there's a French detective, Detective Verbon, who is, I guess, on loan or on exchange with the New York Police Department, who is investigating this case.
Yeah, so I guess I read it as literal just because I feel like I had to take pretty much everything in this book at face value, because it was such a dream book. But there's an interesting story I came across in an interview with Charyn about that, which was that he said, if I could just read it real quickly, he says, the ideas for Magician's Wife came from a novel which just didn't work out. My main idea for the book was to have a lady werewolf who attacks men in Central Park, a comic theme against the backdrop of the 1970s. I never developed it into a novel, but in thinking about it for a bande dessinée, it was as if I were a kind of very weird movie director giving a signal and a word, and it comes back as an image. And I began to realize how maybe unconsciously I'd always had the desire to turn words into images. The illustrator for the bande dessinée religiously followed the first chapter of the scenario I'd outlined, and I was delighted with it, maybe even more delighted than trying to reread one's own work. The illustrator gave a dimension to the words that they had never had before. So the interviewer, Frederick Tooten, asks, so you sent them part of the unfinished novel, and they worked from there? And Charyn says, I sent the outline of the story, and it was translated into French. The editor of the magazine liked it. We found an illustrator who agreed to do it. That's how we began. But we soon ran into problems because Boucq, he never names Boucq here. He just says, because the illustrator didn't speak English, and I wasn't in Paris that often. So after the first part, he went off on a tangent, which I didn't like, though at least it wasn't totally disastrous. You mean he altered the storyline? Yes. For instance, I thought of a detective who was a tough New York City cop. He changed him into a kind of Hercule Poirot, who in my opinion didn't work well. So when the book was published in the U.S., I changed the detective from a tough American cop into a comic French one who is idiotic. So you discovered that doing a bande dessinée is like making a movie. Yes, you have all the problems of production, of working with a brilliant brute. Now, elsewhere, he seems to be very complimentary of Boucq, but it's funny that in this interview, he airs some of the dirty laundry of collaboration or dissatisfaction with him.
So you just said in that interview excerpt that you read, and thanks for that, by the way,
sure,
that Charyn said that Detective Verbon, the French detective, comes across as rather comedic.
Well, he changed it to be comedic supposedly because he didn't like the fact that he was drawn as a French detective.
Because see, I didn't read Verbon as comedic at all.
Yeah, in fact, I thought he was kind of understanding and tragic, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read him much more as a Poirot character than I did as let's say this Pink Panther type figure, right?
Yeah. I think the reason I was so curious, what led me down the rabbit hole of trying to learn more about this collaboration process was because all these are credited as Charyn's own translations. And I just found, and I'll come up with the specific examples. I started noting them after a while. At first but I find the English kind of chunky in places for someone whose native language is English and who is a writer to boot. I find that there's just weird areas of weird instances of chunkiness. For what I assume the process was so that I just wanted to know how much French he knew and what the scripts were originally written in. And it turns out that at least for the earlier work, it seems that he didn't have much French at all. He was living in France, but in Paris, but trying to actively resist learning French because he didn't want it to pollute his inner ear, was what he would say, pollute his sense of English. And so the working process seemed to be that he would write in English, send it to the editor, and the editor would find some intermediary, probably a translator, turn it into French so Boucq and Loustal could read it. And then so apparently what was published in France originally would have been a translation of Charyn's English. But I find traces of it back in the this ostensibly American English. Like in Billy Budd, there's a part where the Red Eagle is rescuing the main character from like a sewer explosion, which is drawn like a portal to hell. It's like this crazy huge explosion. But anyway,
right.
Red Eagle says something like, we don't have time for the status of your soul, which is almost an exact French, état d'âme, which really just means mood, or we don't have time for, mood swings, or, there's something else that could have happened there. But so it's like, or maybe Charyn didn't check it as closely, or maybe Charyn was more distantly involved in bringing these back into English. I don't know, but there's just weird things. Like there's also like in Boys of Sheriff Street, there's a part where someone says his life had been reduced into, and it was no, reduced to, right? Like weird stuff. So I was just very interested in like trying to figure out what was really going on in the terms of how these books were produced. Like the fact that Charyn calls what he wrote a scenario. I mean, no one uses the word scenario to describe a script for any medium in English, but it's the standard word for a comic script in French, scénario, but like you say a comic script, you say a movie screenplay or a movie script, but you don't say scenario for any of those things. So like it's weird that he has let like little French terms, he called them albums too, which I think, you and I call them albums now, but like that's a more recent thing. So it's just it's strange. I mean, I'm sorry, I've been going on at length about this, but and so to come across that story of how Boucq just ran with something altogether and like completely added a visual element that had not been there was fascinating to me, because like that's I mean, this collaboration, at least at the beginning, sounds like it wasn't that close for the first book already because of the language barrier. So that it sounds like it was a little distant, like there was some unnamed intermediaries involved, whether the editor or a translator or something, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have thought of that without you having read that interview excerpt, because the collaboration in The Magician's Wife seems, at least for me, relatively seamless. And maybe that's because of the kind of narrative it is, as we were discussing, where, reality and fantasy seem to meld one easily into the other, right?
Yeah, no. I mean, I do think I think the main achievement of this book for me is that, like, because I think it's hard to sustain a sense of dreamlikeness without giving. You have to give the reader breadcrumbs through something that's so dreamlike, because otherwise I think they get repelled by this kind of hermetic feel to, like, they don't have any footholds, or so like it's skillful in how he keeps you reading and yet doesn't betray the dream atmosphere.
Right. Okay, let's move on to a fourth work that we've referenced a few times, but we haven't yet discussed, and that is The Boys of Sheriff Street. Now, as I pointed out at the top of this episode, this is kind of a standout book. I mean, it's also written by Jerome Charyn, but one of the several ways I think that it stands out from among the others is that this is the only one that we're discussing this month that is not illustrated by François Boucq. The illustrator here is Jacques de Loustal. But I also think that this stands out in not just the art, but also because of the storytelling style, which is markedly different than what we see with Charyn in Little, Tulip, Billy Budd KGB, and even The Magician's Wife.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I know you mentioned not really getting into it, and
I mentioned this off air, so
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So our listeners are going, what? I don't remember Derek saying that. But no, I did. Yeah. Right before we started to record, I said, this didn't resonate with me as much as the others did, but I do want to talk about that, but go ahead.
No. Should we start with the basic setup first, I guess, then?
Yeah. And I think of the four books that we're discussing, this is the easiest to summarize.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's less going on. and it's more of a classic story. But I think all of that is deliberate. I mean, he talks about how Charyn in his introduction talks about how he wanted to write something like, very stark and basic, like with Greek tragedy overtones, something that, and I think Loustal's art is a lot more iconic and abstracted,
right?
So that it lends itself to tableau. I do feel like this is a story that proceeds with a series of tableau rather than this sort of sense of motion that you get with Boucq's art, like
right, sequential flowing action.
Yeah, no, and I think what's most interesting to me is how Charyn has adapted his narrative style to fit this art. And I think a lot about like what it means when reviewers say, "Oh, this writer knows how to write for artists, or write for this particular artist, or write to this artist's strengths." I feel like a lot of times comics reviews are too capsule to really unpack that and talk about what that means. But I feel like this is a good case of that. I mean, regardless of what we think of the actual story, it's interesting how because like also there's a much more distant, omniscient narration at work here, yet one that favors single sentences or even phrases instead of longer paragraphs.
Right.
I feel like he mostly uses narration. Well, Little Tulip and Billy Budd have first person narration, so it's very propulsive. But in other cases, he uses narration to bridge scenes, to hinge you from moment to moment, to fill in a gap. And whereas in it's very much, I feel like the narration in Sheriff Street is a substantial part of the narrative feel and direction.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so basically what we have in The Boys of Sheriff Street, straightforward story, basically takes place in the 1930s on the Lower East Side. This is basically a story with gang rivalries. The main gang is headed by the brothers Max and Morris. They're both Jewish. Max is the brains and the head of this gang. He is shorter than Morris. He has a hunchback, so he stands out in that way. He's a hunchback and he's shorter, but also he's the one who calls all the shots. He's the brains of the operation.
They're supposed to be twins, right?
Exactly.
Except for that fact, that physical fact.
And for all practical purposes, I guess, in Loustal's art, they really don't look like twins. Morris, early on in the story, meets and then brings back a very attractive woman by the name of Ida Chance. And Ida Chance is not only very attractive, and not only does she mesmerize all the men in Max and Morris's gang, but she also mesmerizes Max. And so there is this tension going on between Max and Ida, where he is a little put off that Ida has taken the attention of his brother Morris, but at the same time, Max is drawn to Ida. And so there's that interesting little dynamic there. And then they're in a rivalry with another gang headed by a guy named Leo the Whale. And so, a decent part of the book is, fighting between these two gangs. At one point, Morris, and I don't think this is a spoiler, Morris is killed. And so that kind of opens things up between Max and Ida. And I'll just leave it at that, because talking about what happens to the two of them, I guess would approach spoilerdom.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic setup. There's a femme fatale, and then Max Max must have her, but he can't live with the fact that he wants her so badly, and he's also much more awkward than his smooth, more handsomer brother. So he makes a series of increasingly bad decisions in order to try and get her for himself. And the rivalry with the Wales gang isn't quite as, it doesn't have to happen, but Max makes it happen because he's
flexing his muscle.
Yeah, he's into bad decisions all of a sudden.
Right, and also I think it's to impress Ida.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just as a note, the original French title of this was The Brothers Adamov. Right.
Wow. Now, you mentioned the tableau form or the style of art in Loustal, and that makes sense. I couldn't help but think of woodcuts, and not that his art in The Boys of Sheriff Street look like woodcuts by any means. It's just that the style of storytelling in terms of the art seems to have this kind of basicness to it, right? Where you have just scene or tableau and then the next scene or tableau without the flowing action that we get, let's say, in the other books that we're discussing this month.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, maybe it's just something about the handwriting on the signs or the font on the signs, but I feel like definitely not so much in his faces and his people scenes, but just in the exteriors, there was something Catcher-esque about his city.
Oh, really? You thought so?
Yeah. Maybe it's just even just maybe it's just I mean, Catcher stuff is generally far more detailed and yet also fuzzy, but maybe it's just something about the writing. I don't mean the Charyn's writing. I mean the actual lettering of signs.
Right. That
made me like I don't know, say page 15 for example, with the poultry market written on the truck or wholesale, things like that. Yeah. That was something.
Yeah. I want to get back to something that you mentioned earlier about this book, and that is its form of narration, where you pointed out that, I mean, not only is this a third person point of view, which is different, let's say, from, little Tulip, definitely. But there is much more of a distance between the narrator and the events that are taking place. And almost as if the narrative is at arm's length from the act of narration itself. And in this way, I couldn't help but think of this as an example of naturalist storytelling. And by naturalist, I don't mean that it has more of a basis in what we see as the real world. I'm talking about naturalism, in terms of, let's say, with American, writers such as Frank Norris and Stephen Crane, especially Frank Norris. I mean, there's something.
So you mean socially overdetermined?
Yes, exactly. That we know in other words, what happens between Max, Morris, Ida Chance is going to happen, and we can almost predict it from the very beginning, that there is a very deterministic universe, one that we think we have matters of choice involved, but really what we call chance is nothing more than an excuse to try to make sense of determinism, and that Max and Ida are fated to end up the way that they end up just because of the way that things are set up at the very beginning, right? And so I couldn't help but think of this story as something similar to, let's say, Maggie of Girl of the Streets or McTeague, both Frank Norris novels. I mean, I just got that sense. Also, in terms of just the bareness of the storytelling itself. We were talking about, the stripped down bareness of Loustal's art, but I think that there's even more of a stripped downness in terms of the storytelling technique, to the point that in the various panels, more times than not, when there is text, it is narration text at the bottom of every panel. There's not near the amount of dialogue that we see in the other works that we've been discussing.
Yeah, and I do.
And whatnot.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, there are pluses and minuses to that approach. I don't think the main difference between this and I think the kind of naturalism examples that you mentioned is that I don't feel like there's as nearly as vast a sense or grasp of social scope. I don't feel like I see. I feel like I see the internal forces between in these small gangs and communities that converge on tragedy, but I don't get a sense of like the city or New York or the era or the forces of the time intervening in this story. But I do. I think sometimes when the narration worked the most for me was, oddly enough or paradoxically enough, when it felt the most dissonant, because it felt like there was something like he was trying to get up something off the page that was neither in the illustration or in his words. So I almost liked it that the words were somehow mismatched. It seemed like the words were describing something that the image wasn't bearing out, or the image had something that the words were like pretending not to notice. Or like, I feel like those are the moments when this book achieved a kind of poetry to me. But at the other hand, it totally flattens out character and your sense of involvement in the character. Like I've rarely encountered such a boring femme fatale
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
because you don't get any sense of her liveliness or how is she scheming? Is she a gold digger? You have no idea because your perceptions of her are locked entirely in Max's head, and Max just has a couple adjectives for her that he reuses, like savage, and so like we don't have any idea what she might be thinking, what she might be angling at, how smart she really is. There are very few times, like there's just one scene where like she really lays into a mannequin with a wedding dress on, but like that's one of the few times where I feel like she breaks free of this flat narrative flatness that's imposed on her, and we get a sense of her character.
Right. And I think that gets back to some degree to what I was saying earlier in my feeling of this is kind of a naturalist with a capital N kind of narrative. You were talking about the flatness of the characters. I looked at it as the simpleness of the characters. And these are the kind of individuals that we tend to get in naturalist writing. Individuals who are maybe more animal and instinctive than conflicted emotionally or intellectually. But when you were describing the flatness of Ida Chance as a femme fatale, I was thinking again an example of American naturalism, Theodore Dreiser and Sister Carrie. At least with Sister Carrie, as simple as she is, we get to see the conflictedness inside of her at times. We never do though with Ida Chance.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating that she's the one who rescues Max from drowning. That is another part where like that narrative kind of sticks out to me. And also like, maybe because it's silent, it's also very powerful, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely a different kind of story. And when I suggested earlier to you before we started the recording that this didn't resonate with me the way that the others did, I think that was more of a function of when I read this book in relation to the others, because the order in which I prepared for this month's show, I think the first book that I read was Little Tulip because again, it was the most recent publication. Then I read Billy Budd KGB, then Magician's Wife. Okay. So all three of those are Charyn Boucq compositions. But then the last one I read was The Boys of Sheriff Street. And I think having read The Boys of Sheriff Street right after those three Charyn Boucq collaborations, it just struck me as quite different in a way that maybe if I had started off with The Boys of Sheriff Street or maybe read Boys of Sheriff Street second, maybe after Little Tulip or Billy Budd, I wouldn't feel the same way. I don't want to say that I was spoiled after reading the Boucq art, but I'm not saying I liked it less or I liked it more. It just didn't resonate with me because maybe I wasn't ready for it. Maybe I wasn't used to it after having read the other three books.
No, I understand. I totally understand that. I think since I've read other Loustal things, I may be more predisposed to liking his art. I guess for me, it really was just more. It was interesting. I find this book fascinating, not particularly involving, but fascinating for its narrative contrast to the others. And I think, one of the nice things, right? And one of the nice things about these Dover editions is that Charyn often provides his own new introductions to these books, and he does have some really, I think, germane things to say for the Loustal one, especially. He says, Loustal's images are almost mosaics that he applies to a tale piece by piece. We move in slow motion, as if a painter such as Matisse had suddenly decided to do a graphic novel. Loustal has an aesthetic, a painterly touch. His art is not about movement; it's about solitary images in a dream. I had no desire. I didn't want to lose Loustal's wonderful sense of the mosaic. I wanted to tell a crime story in stop time, a slow motion universe. So it's like I do think that like what we were talking about as tableau is that kind of like mosaic is another interesting way of putting it. It's like I'm applying these panels as units pre-made to like my narrative mosaic, right. And they don't flow from one to the other. They're like specific moments. And I think the moments when it achieves something even more is when the narration and the image feel slightly and deliberately mismatched, kind of like when you have counterpoint images in other people's work.
Yeah. And, you pointed out that, Charyn refers to Loustal's art as painterly. And I think that's a really good way of putting it, because the art in The Boys of Sheriff Street And I think this adds to the period piece-ness of it, having taken place in the 1930s. This strikes me, Loustal's art, as something that you would be more apt to see in a museum of early 20th century art, American modernism, when compared or contrasted to Boucq's.
Yeah, it's not coming out of a realistic style in any way, and it's got even like the sort of solid, bright colors of I don't know, Matisse, of some fauvism. Yeah, but I do think it was fascinating to read all four to get like a deep Charyn dive, because we could trace the sort of motifs that persist from. I mean, because style aside, Boys of Sheriff Street, I feel does come from like a lineage. I mean, it's like I think of Billy Bathgate, when I read it, or Charyn too talks about growing up with Jewish gangsters, and being part of being a delinquent as a kid. I think he was even briefly a bodybuilder and of some kind of fighter as well.
Yeah. Well, I like the way that you put that. We had a deep Charyn dive on this month's episode because, we definitely got into a lot of his writing. We looked at 4 books. We have been discussing Little Tulip, Billy Budd KGB, and The Magician's Wife, all illustrated by François Boucq. And then we wrapped up with a brief discussion of The Boys of Sheriff Street, which Charyn collaborated with Jacques de Loustal. And all of those are Dover publications, so definitely check those out, and they're well worth the reading.
Yeah, they're and the propulsive, very gutsy storytelling, fearless storytelling, a lot of story, burning through story, and satisfyingly pulpy as well, I would say.
That's right. And if you want to find great books like this, then head over to the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. If you go to dcbservice.com right now, you'll find great prices on a variety of comics, many of them European-based in translations. But every kind of comic that you could want, you will find at great prices at dcbservice.com. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or feel free to drop us an email at 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or write to me directly at edward@comicsalternative.com.
Or you can contact me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com. So there are a lot of ways for people to get in touch with us, and we do like to hear from you. So if you have a particular taste for European comics, and let's say you're a fan of Jerome Charyn and François Boucq or Loustal's work, let us know what you thought about this show, or get in touch with us and recommend other things for us to discuss.
Yeah, titles, themes, authors, creators, or are there other aspects that you of comics that you'd like us to concentrate on? That would well be great.
That's right. So we do want to hear from you, and we will be back next month with more Euro Comics fun. Until then, I'm Derek.
I'm Edward. go and read some good books.